and just relying on SP1, they're not going to do it. And therefore, once you get the sea change in the nationals with new directors or planning consultants looking for sites, it's just not going to be on their radar to come over to the island, albeit there are national house builder directors that live on the island and they know the market. I would suggest that if the market is de-risked with allocations, then why wouldn't they? We all agree that the island's got some self-containment in its sub-market, and therefore, if the market's there, it doesn't matter if they're looking at a site in Portsmouth, Southampton, New Forest or elsewhere, because they form their own separate identities. It's just a business case that they would look at to say, well, actually, we can roll out into the space because the Isle of Wight isn't competing with my product in Portsmouth or elsewhere. It's an irrelevant detail because the market can survive in its own right without competing against their own business objectives. So I don't see that as a problem at all. We just need to give them the ability to do it. We'll probably, under a separate session, and excuse me if I'm wrong, we'll probably come on to the more detailed policies of housing delivery. But just to point on what Mr. Gentleman was saying, historically, the island, we've had nationals, we've had kind of still smaller scale SMEs that are delivering in island terms sensible volume. You know, you're ranging between, say, 50, 100 plus units. Great. And then you've got, right at the other end, you've got the smaller builder developers or smaller investment developers that are delivering, say, even 1, 2, 5, 10 type of territory. And the island historically has been quite buoyant in that market, as per the windfall rates. In the housing trajectory, looking at 100 units per annum from those smaller windfall style sites. If the detailed policies in the plan don't give the ability for those builder developers to come forward, then we've got a big problem. And I know we're going to tackle that under separate session. The reason I raise that is I'm not sure that the policies in detail will help those smaller sites to come forward, which are, 100 units a year is a significant percentage or an allowance per annum. Those windfall sites are primarily premeditated on exception rural housing, primarily based on affordable housing, self and custom build, infill of up to 1 to 3 dwellings, and one other that I can't remember, I apologise. But they're very much marginalised policies, and so we need to be careful about, we're concentrating in major part of debate about nationals coming over, but we also need to concentrate on the smaller indigenous supply and helping the industry with our young and growing industry to stay here and build and develop. Why wouldn't they? But at the moment, we've got an aging builder developer profile because it's been too difficult to do. We just need to, we'll come on a separate session, but we need to make sure that that is correct.
Thank you. Mr. Gentleman, next.
I just wanted to follow up on that point, that the small builders of today become the bigger builders of tomorrow. And you need to ensure that you've got things for them to do within the plan. When you look at historic delivery, which is referenced in this document, and the amount of that's been delivered by smaller builder developers, those people expand and they become the bigger developers of tomorrow. My former company, which is now delivering, it's the largest private developer on the Isle of Wight, we started very small, and we grew that firm while I was with it over 19 years. And today, the gents that now own that firm in place of me continue to expand it. And that's a true island story of starting small and scaling up. But in order to do that, there needs to be things within the plan that allow those builders and developers to continue to operate at that level. And it's interesting, there's great value in having large-scale national house builders on the Isle of Wight delivering, like Persimmon, David Wilson and Barratt, as they have in the past. But it's really interesting that island-based companies that grow and develop here have a great deal of care about the island. And they tend to do that because they live here, they value it, and they understand it. There are easier places to develop, trust me. I've developed in some of them, but I develop here because I live here, and I like it here. But you know, there's a limit to that if we keep putting barriers in the way. Thank you.
Thank you for those contributions. If there's anything the council wishes to pick up in response to what I've heard.
A couple of very minor points, and I think, as Mr. Long quite rightly said, we'll probably come on to some of the more detailed housing policies next week and the impact or otherwise of those, and just in reference to the windfall development, and obviously the 100 a year that we've got in the plan is set out in our Matter 7 hearing statement. We've actually been relatively conservative on that, and sites under 10 have delivered on average 158 a year over the last 8 years. But obviously we can come into that in a bit more detail next week as to whether that's an appropriate approach. And I suppose I don't want to labour the point about the major nationals, but we've heard that you know, they are a business. Absolutely recognise that. I guess my point is that the plan making process is a really good opportunity for those businesses to take a site that they really want to develop on and get it in a plan and then develop. And that's not the situation that we're faced with here. It may be in future iterations of the plan that does happen. And obviously, if that's the case, then the council can deal with that accordingly. But I think it is just worth pointing out that absolutely they're businesses, but they've made a business decision not to promote land through this plan. And I think that's something that is certainly part of the conversation.
And is that, we'll come on to site selection tomorrow, so I don't want to sort of foreshadow too much of that discussion. I mean, is that true in the sense of what's sort of being promoted through the SHLA as well, that there just isn't kind of a national house builder promotion through the opportunity of this plan?
That's correct. Yeah.
Thank you. Previously sort of shared some thoughts around, I mean, I'm going to sort of jump a little bit between kind of D and H on the agenda. I mean, I think from everything I've heard this morning, there's two distinct camps. The council's position that we should find the 453 sound. I think anybody's particularly articulating or suggesting there's an alternative figure other than the 703 from the standard method. So whether we kind of look at the evidence and at different points within past trends might point to a different or alternative figure. If we were to go down or be thinking about the 703 figure and thinking about striking the appropriate balance between ensuring that there's plan-led certainty that the council clearly wants and should be the outcome of a plan process, and the ability to kind of step up through potentially larger sites as part of that mix. I think obviously that's something we would think about and present out in terms of initial kind of findings for the council. I think it's either Mr. Brewer or Mr. Bedford said any kind of stepping would have to be clearly evidenced or robust. And I think we'd probably be thinking about giving the council the opportunity as to whether that evidence or material is there to kind of support anything along those lines. But it strikes us that we would be thinking to go down that route. It's quite a significant change to be contemplating, and obviously we've got to some extent be thinking about, you know, the realism of what that means, how long that could potentially take that was to be the outcome of our kind of thought process. Appreciate the council's not saying at this stage, no, that's something we are going to look at, and we'll embody that. But I mean, I don't know if the council has any kind of initial views or reaction to, you know, inspectors, if you are thinking about larger sites, please bear this in mind, or caution about this, about that particular approach, other than kind of, you know, we don't think it's deliverable because of what's happened, you know, over the recent past in terms of the activity on the island and the absence of national house builder interest within this process.
Thank you, sir. And I think, yeah, a couple of points. I'll just come back on that. I think we've rehearsed the delivery part of the conversation really well this morning between all parties. It's been really positive and interesting to hear that debate. I think from a supply perspective, if we are, I guess I'm kind of talking to point D on the agenda here, around that kind of reasonable alternative, and I suppose a couple of documents of interest would be, sorry, the regulation, let's call it regulation open brackets 1, close brackets 2018. So regulation 18 from 2018-19. So that plan considered the then standard method of 641. And I think, as Mr. Gentleman quite correctly said earlier on, there are a number of smaller site allocations in there. There was an allocation of a couple of sites from people represented here around the table today, and also 2 areas of search for garden settlements and a portion of housing from those. And that got us to just about 641. So whilst we haven't raised supply as an issue, I think it would be worth, you know, if the inspectors are thinking around that, they would be 2 documents that I'd probably go and have a look at, just in terms of perhaps some of the, I won't say challenges, but some of the timing implications that then may arise from having to step back into some of that work and possibly do even more.
I fully appreciate, you know, it is the plan before us now that is the plan that's under examination. We're not necessarily wholly going back to what occurred at previous regulation 18, but I think it's probably noteworthy, and it's kind of been identified by various people, that the latest sustainability appraisal records that at that stage, when you were looking at 641, the consequence of that consultation and that process was, on the one hand, significant opposition. The sustainability appraisal process records that, and then secondly, I think where the council's coming from, is that deliverable? And obviously you've kind of then gone from that point in terms of your evidence about whether you think that is deliverable, notwithstanding obviously it engendered at that time significant opposition from local communities.
It's fair to say in relation to that the opposition, so far as it related to planning matters, did focus on the deliverability of those higher figures. I mean, that's what we set out clearly in the evidence papers as to why there was a change of tack. It wasn't, in a sense, simply people didn't like it. There was a reason why they were saying that they didn't think it was the appropriate strategy, and a large part of that was the deliverability of that. So I think we would say, well, ultimately you're going to have to come to a conclusion on the deliverability issues that we've outlined in those various papers, and since well, the views that you form on that will very much influence to what extent you consider that the requirement is pitched at the level which we've identified it as being aspirational but deliverable. And clearly, if you think that, in a sense, there is more that is deliverable in that, I suppose we would be looking for some kind of broad indication from you as to where you were thinking that the limits would be, before we could really, I think, then engage with, well, what would be the knock-on consequences of that, and what might that mean? Obviously, as Mr. Brewer has said, looking back at some of the earlier evidence base, but also then looking at wider issues and what might need updating or further testing.
We obviously looked at that yesterday in terms of consequence of extending a plan period. I think the council set out there to kind of the menu of work or the additional kind of issues it would raise for you as an authority if the plan period was extended. I think your case was quite clear. It's not simply just extrapolating certain parts of the existing evidence base. It would trigger a need for further work potentially. Yeah. Okay. Obviously, other people want to come in. We're going to break for lunch relatively shortly because we're kind of on a slightly different day today because we have got to finish in this room by half three. So, but Mr. Beverley, if I can hear from you next.
Yeah, so I'll keep it really brief. Obviously, we're not here to talk about emission sites, and it's not before you now. But just given it was in a previous iteration of the plan, obviously our clients' land interests are literally just down the road in Newport. It's a strategic site that we think would be more attractive to local people than those people coming on the island, and essentially it is kind of the baby of the bathwater of the application of the island realistic strategy, given it was previously in the plan. So I suppose it's just to demonstrate that is the kind of site that we've lost through the application of where the council have gone.
Thank you. I don't know if they're legacy cards, whether there's additional point, Mr. Gentleman.
Thanks very much. Just looking at the number specifically, the bit that I don't understand with this, and we talked about this yesterday with employment, Mr. Beverley brought this up earlier, as did I, but if we accept that the evidence within this document supports to a fallout rate of 30%, then surely we have to be planning for that fallout rate within the allocations. So, what I see as the failure of this is that this does not plan for that fallout rate. The evidence within the document is clear about that fallout rate. We all know about how that works. That's a national thing, but we're not planning here for that fallout rate. We're not acknowledging that. And actually we're setting ourselves up to fail. Arguably, if you're moving toward the standard figure of 703, we should be planning it for an excess of 900, because we know that 30% falls out. That's some basic maths. And, you're looking at how I run my business interests. If I know that I have a percentage that, does not come off, then I have to plan for that. Why are we not planning for that? Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, we'll come on to this, I think, as part of matter 7 when we're looking at the housing land supply. I mean, I'd like to think going forward through a plan-led, increasingly through the plan-led system, through kind of new evidence bases, particularly with the strategic housing land availability assessment. We look at the windfall rates, there is more assurance that what does go into the housing requirement pot is implemented. I mean, I must admit, I've not come across such significant non-implementation of fallout rates elsewhere in the country any time in the recent past. It does seem that things that are allocated or identified through the plan system are coming forward. More confidence, but I think that's more a matter, I think, when we get to matter 7, housing land supply.
So yes, we would agree with that, and also I think we would suggest that conceptually, the issue about fallout doesn't really input to setting the requirement figure. The issue about fallout inputs into the supply side of things, and it wouldn't be, we would suggest, consistent with current national policy to uplift a requirement to cater for fallout. You deal with fallout through how you deal with supply.
I would agree with that. Councillor Jarman, was your nameplate up from previously, or a legacy? Good. Oh, okay. Okay, are there any further final points people wish to make in relation to housing requirement? That's been a relatively lengthy session this morning. I think it's quite clear to us. I think this is sort of indicated yesterday. It's obviously one of the more substantial matters that we've got to kind of grapple with in terms of our probably will take the form of initial findings for the council in terms of where the plan sits in relation to soundness. We've obviously got to come to a view as to whether the 453 is the sound and right approach, or whether we need to be advising the council to adopt an alternative figure. See, people have put their views forward on that, and indeed in relation to what the housing needs should be in terms of the starting point, the alternative starting point from Councillor Jarman and others. So I think I'd like to thank people for their contributions this morning. Just mindful it's the council's plan. If there's anything further you want to kind of conclude on, or
I was going to echo your point there. So thank you for everyone's contributions. It is a difficult and complex topic that is challenging to get heads around. Certainly when you talk about need and requirement and the challenge of the island, and certainly just the ability to have this debate through the plan making process, I think is really important and really positive for the island. So thank you to everyone.
Well, we're back in this room at, I think we're going to start at 1:30 because there are other people joining us for this afternoon's session where we're going to look at the spatial strategy, which will be really looking at kind of a combination of parts, I think, excuse me, of policies H1 and E1, and how that fits with policy. Is it GS2? G2. So I'm creating my own new policies now. G2. So look forward to seeing some of you again after the lunchtime adjournment back in this room, please, at 1:30. Thank you.